Welcome, everyone. We're here to be talking about a concert coming up in November on the 17th at the Royal Festival Hall with the Philharmonia Orchestra, the Bach Choir, and wonderful soloists Roddy Williams and Elizabeth Watts. A great program of all about Vaughan Williams, who was, we'll come to this later maybe, a singing member and a previous musical director of the Bach Choir. And so this is an important moment for us to be able to celebrate. And I'm delighted that Roddy Williams is here to talk about this event, and indeed Vaughan Williams and other things too. So Roddy, welcome. Thank you for this.
Thank you for having me.
You'll be singing with everyone the Sea Symphony, a piece you must know so well. What do you feel about this work, and what do you think is a sort of a selling point of it?
I think there are two selling points. The first is the most obvious and immediate one. Is just the opening, the way it opens with this brass fanfare and then the massed voices singing a cappella for a few bars. Behold the sea itself, and the sound of the orchestra weighing in when the choir sings. Behold the sea itself. The sound is like the crashing of waves. This huge crashing of waves on the beach. It's pictorially very strong. And it's something that anybody like myself, I happen to be living in Warwickshire. So for me, the idea of getting to the sea is always a grand moment when the smell in the air changes, becomes more salty. And once you see the sea for the first time on the horizon there, that is when Vaughan Williams's music really hits you hard. It's a beautiful, beautiful seascape picture. So that's the first thing, the ebullience of it, just the cymbal crash of it. It's fantastic. But then there's something else that after that opening that happens throughout the entire symphony, and this has over the years become more and more important to me personally, and that is the poetry of Walt Whitman talking about the whole concept of a United Nations. He's saying that out there on the sea, humanity is basically one. Doesn't matter what flag your ship happens to be carrying. It's kind of man, or mankind, I should say, humanity and the sea, humanity and nature. And we're all in this together. And I remember, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, singing this in Kuala Lumpur, of all places. And the audience that I found myself looking at as the performance started was from such a mix of places. And the Malaysian society is a real mixture of races anyway, and then the people who come to a concert like this classical concert in Kuala Lumpur were the Malaysian audience plus expats plus people from all over, and I found myself looking at this audience, not to mention the orchestra behind me made up of so many different nations themselves. And as we sang about United Nations, I thought, yes, this is what Walt Whitman was talking about. And I love that it was so important to him towards the end of the 19th century, before the United Nations was founded as a concept in the mid 20th century. And it's something that we are wrestling with and coping with and trying to explore and aspiring to right now.
Absolutely. It makes it kind of, for our time, I mean, it's ageless in that sense. I mean, particularly important right now, actually. Yeah. And that's a really fascinating view of it. And a lot of people won't know, as I alluded to earlier, that Vaughan Williams did have a strong relationship with the choir, and both as a singer. I don't know how good he was, no record of that, what his marks were, but also as musical director for many years. And in fact, the Sea Symphony was one of the very last things he conducted with the choir, to a very good, actually, review in those days, the Musical Times. And I just think, I don't know about you, but Vaughan Williams has always meant quite a lot to me in terms of just a composer from a very young age. I just sort of connected into what he was trying to do, particularly, of course, The Lark Ascending, but other things too. What about you, Roddy? I mean, what do you feel about it?
Well, I met his music first through his choral music. I think as a choir boy, I remember very strongly his really short, really beautiful anthem, "O taste and see how gracious the Lord is." It's really simple, and its simplicity sort of worked its way in to me in a very profound way.
Should we just say that, of course, it was written for the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II in 1952.
Well, there you are. I hadn't realised it. I feel the goosebumps going on. I didn't realise that significance.
I'm right on that, but I think it is. I think that was right.
Yeah. And there's something about Williams. He, for someone who was so much a part of the establishment, he could sometimes have this really quietly subversive wrong footing. So I can imagine such a magnificent occasion as that. And he writes an anthem of such simplicity. It's so basic, so simple. I think that's, and people talk about his symphonies and that's that same way. I later came across his a cappella choral music when, as a teenager, we were exposed to the 3 Shakespeare songs.
Oh, marvelous, yes.
Just terrific, and it blew my mind, the harmony of those, particularly the first one, the way the first one starts, these augmented chords, and then the second one, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces. Oh my goodness, again, another hair on the back of the neck moment to listen to these things. It was really tricky. I remember the choir I was singing with, we found it really challenging, but actually, once we got a grip on it, we found it so much fun. And I put the Mass in G minor as well, big a cappella choral work that I met as an impressionable teenager going to my early 20s. These were the pieces that really got to me before I discovered his solo songs. And then, in my professional singing career, I've made discs of them, and they've been a backbone of what I sing. But actually, it was his choral music. Oh, I also do remember playing the cello as a schoolboy in a performance of the Sea Symphony. So the first time I ever connected with the Sea Symphony was as a schoolboy cellist. You waited for someone to tap you on the shoulder and say, "Son, pay attention. This piece is going to be important to you later in life." How was I to know? But
that's fascinating, actually. I mean, I think I don't know. I sense I've always felt, having read about things that Vaughan Williams would tell people about and write about, that he was trying to say to everyone, just don't listen to people producing their music in Germany and other places. Get hold of folk songs, get hold of something that gets you going as composers in this country. I think he really is the grandfather of our sort of 20th century English music foundation, in a way that Elgar is amazing and incredible, and of course world renowned. He looked to Germany for his kind of ideas, but Williams kind of just espoused all of that and said, actually, I think it's got to be, we've got to find a new voice. And I think he's just done an amazing job for it. And it's been brilliant this year. And of course, you've been hugely involved in it. Been brilliant to see just how much he's suddenly now really revered and supported, loved by everyone. Well, another work we're doing in the concert is the Garden of Proserpine, and which is a piece I can say that in 2011, I conducted actually its first performance in a concert in the English Music Festival. Why? Vaughan Williams disbanded it, and Michael Kennedy put it, anyone hearing this beautiful work for the first time must be as mystified as I am, Michael Kennedy, that as its composer should have abandoned it without apparently making any effort to have it performed. Do you know the work, and have you come across?
Good Lord, no, not at all. I mean, I was listening to bits of Composer of the Week a few weeks back when Donald MacLeod was having a survey of Vaughan Williams' work, and one thing that immediately hits us is how much he wrote.
Yeah.
And of course, I know the bits I know, particularly the singing bits, and also some of the orchestral bits, and that is the tip of the iceberg. So it doesn't surprise me at all that this piece that I've just not come across. Similarly, I've been championing for a long time a piece of his that I recorded some time ago with David Lloyd Jones, the late David Lloyd Jones. It was Willowwood. It's this from the same source of poetry as the House of Life, from which Silent Noon comes, and this piece apparently Vaughan Williams wrote on it after the first performance with baritone, wordless female chorus and orchestra. He'd originally written it for baritone and piano, then he orchestrated like that, and he wrote on the manuscript, total flop, and put it on the shelf. And that is where it remained for the next 90, whatever it was, years, until David Lloyd-Jones and his team got it off, dusted it down. We recorded it. And everybody, like you say, like Michael Kennedy was saying, scratching their heads saying, but this is beautiful. What's wrong with it? And you know what? Actually, since then, it's taken me ages to get a performance. I've done it with piano once or twice. But as far as I know, the first performance of it with the original scoring was again at the English Music Festival, just earlier this year. Hilary David Wetton was conducting. And as far as I know, that's the first time since 1909.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'll see you in Raisy, David.
No, it's so, well, just, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because I think I can say honestly, the Garden of Proserpine is, as Michael Kennedy has quite rightly put in his words about it, it's really a fantastic piece that has all the elements of what you put into Toward the Unknown Region, which everyone knows and loves, and of course the Sea Symphony, very much in this rather dark world, or the underworld of Proserpine and the goddess of death. It's not an overly happy piece, but it shows remarkable skill, and so we're looking forward to that. So we're really saying then, aren't we, that we think that that Vaughan Williams is a hugely important figure in our English music. I mean, he ranks really high there, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think part of it is longevity. All right. So by the time he was writing a lot of music that I'm thinking about, and I would include the Sea Symphony in this as well, he was kind of late 30s, early 40s. So we get the idea. So many composers are young and brilliant, and then there's so many of them who die in their 30s as well. So Vaughan Williams existed right through the 20th century, when, as you say, the Second Viennese School in mainland Europe were.
So we had some technical difficulties along the way here, but very pleased to say that we've now picked things up.
We were just saying about him being the granddaddy of English music, and I was agreeing with that, not least because of his longevity. And just comparing it with the raft of composers throughout music history who have been bright sparks from an early age and then died young for whatever reason or what have you. But Vaughan Williams, on the other hand, survived well into the 20th century at a time when others, for example, the Second Viennese School, were experimenting with all sorts of different ways of creating music. And then into the Darmstadt school, where people really are experimenting. I mean, really experimenting. And looking back at Britain, but specifically the sort of music, brackets, tonal music that Vaughan Williams was writing, and almost laughing and saying that is anachronistic, that is a waste of time, that is a dead end, a musical dead end. And it's taken musicians, I think, and audiences in general, it's taken us a number of decades to be able to reassess Vaughan Williams with the benefit of hindsight, and realize just how much his music is worth in purely musical terms, and then how much we value it in emotive terms. You mentioned, David, the Lark Ascending, and that still has such a grip on the English music listener's psyche that, that's not an accident. And I think it's not an accident when you mentioned to me that Vaughan Williams sang in the Bach choir and that he was a music director of it. He, from the back rows of the baritones, the basses singing there, he will have realized that those modernists writing terrifyingly difficult music for this kind of imaginary cerebral public, music that's impossible to sing unless you've got perfect pitch and some, we're requiring hours and hours of rehearsals. What singers want is something they can get stuck into. And so Vaughan Williams never lost sight of the amateur music maker. Down in Dorking with the Leith Hill Music Society and everything like that, and obviously his time in the Bach choir must have been a huge part of this. He's been amongst people who are getting stuck into Haydn and Mendelssohn and Elgar and what have you, and then in turn the Sea Symphony. It's not easy piece. It takes it takes rehearsals, but of course how it goes woof away.
Absolutely, and in that sort of Ravellian way, from Daphnis and Chloe. So I mean, of course he had a few lessons from Well, he didn't copy him, but at all, but just was inspired by that, I think. But it's also that, of course, it's very true that he of course was editor of the English hymnal at the beginning of the 20th century, when he was trying to revive old chants, coming back into admittedly more Anglo-Catholic traditions of worship, but those alongside the folk songs. But actually, hymnody was very important to him. Down Ampney is one of the greatest tunes of all time, and all of this, and of course, it's Mass in G, all coming from a man who was an atheist.
He said,
what he said, well, what's wrong with it? An atheist writing a good Mass? He thought it was perfectly normal in a way. And I think very much the people's composer in many ways. So you've got to, of course, hand it over to Algar for the marches and the tunes and that, and the rest of it. But there was this intrinsic quality about what Vaughan Williams was offering.
And I agree, and also those photographs of him, particularly as he got older. So my image of Vaughan Williams is a white-haired, huge bear of a man with his trousers up somewhere near his chest, with his ear trumpet in one hand, because he suffered such ear losses when he was in the artillery in the First World War, and all those young composers around him in flocks. So part of his longevity is the influence he had in person on the younger generation coming through in the middle of the 20th century, and then later on the end of the 20th century too. So he's just, his talisman had been Stanford at the Royal College of Music, Stanford and Parry. But then in the 20th century, Vaughan Williams was in many senses this giant, just towering
figure. There's a lovely story that Ursula Howells, a daughter of Herbert Howells, tells of. She said it to me actually, that they would go and have tea on a Sunday afternoon in Primrose Hill, and she'd sit on Uncle Rafe's knee, who was her godfather, and in the room were the Barclays and all the Howells family, and of course Vaughan Williams and his and so on. And she said it was just quite normal. They would just meet, talk about things on a Sunday afternoon and have tea together regularly. And I think that says a lot about how they saw themselves as a community of artists and musicians at the time. Roddy, thank you so much. Just to say that we're going to be having this concert take place in the Festival Hall on November the 17th. Do come along. Buy some tickets. The Philharmonia Orchestra, the Bach Choir, Roddy Williams and Elizabeth Watts.